The notification came at 11:47 p.m., and it was not from her fiancé. It was from his sister. Check his location, right now, before tomorrow. Remy Aldous stared at the screen for a long moment, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed in the white silk robe the bridal suite came with, her rehearsal dinner makeup only half removed, one cotton pad still in her hand. She thought about ignoring it. She thought about putting the phone face down on the nightstand and finishing her skincare routine, and going to sleep the way she'd planned, because tomorrow was her wedding day, and she needed rest, and she was already nervous, and she didn't need this. She checked his location. The pin wasn't at his apartment, where he'd said he was spending his last night as a bachelor. It wasn't at his brother's place either, which was the backup story he'd used before. It was at the Fairmont, 2 floors above her, room 1114. She had a key card to room 914. Remy sat very still for almost 3 minutes. The air conditioning hummed. Outside the window, downtown Vancouver glittered in the November rain. She was 28 years old. She had spent 14 months planning a wedding she'd never actually believed she deserved. She had a dress hanging in a garment bag on the back of the closet door that had cost more than she made in 2 months at Clearwater Capital, where she did reconciliations for accounts that had more zeros in them than she'd seen in her entire childhood combined. She got up. She took the key card from the dresser. She didn't put on shoes. The elevator opened on the 11th floor at 11:52 p.m. She didn't knock. She'd always had a problem with that, going too far before stopping. Her mother called it a character flaw. Remy had always thought of it as arithmetic. You gather the numbers, you see what they add up to. You don't pretend the sum is different than it is just because you don't like the answer. The card reader beeped green. The door opened. She saw everything she needed to see in about 4 seconds. Then she closed the door again, very quietly, and walked back to the elevator, and stood in the hallway outside her own room for a long time, with her back against the wall and the key card still in her hand. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough over Dylan Mercer in the 3 years they'd been together. Over the silences that lasted too long, the explanations that didn't quite line up, the feeling she couldn't shake that she was always one step outside whatever room he was really living in. She had no tears left for this particular version of him. What she had was a very clear spreadsheet in her head. On one side, 14 months of planning, a deposit on a venue in Gastown, 212 guests, a seating chart she'd revised 9 times, a mother who'd flown in from Sudbury and was sleeping 2 floors down in a room Remy had paid for because her mother hadn't been able to afford the flight, let alone a hotel. On the other side, a door she'd just opened and everything she'd seen behind it. She did the math. It didn't take long. She went to bed. She set her alarm. She slept 4 hours. In the morning, she put on the dress. The ceremony was at the Orpheum. Dylan had insisted on it, and Remy had agreed because she'd been agreeing to things for 3 years, and it had become something close to a reflex. The venue was beautiful. High ceilings, ornate stonework, the kind of room that made even ordinary events feel significant. She'd done the budget herself, line by line, because Dylan said he was terrible with numbers and she was so good at them. He was right about that, at least. Her maid of honor, a woman named Petra she'd known since university, was the only one who knew. Remy had texted her at 6 in the morning, and Petra had shown up at the hotel room 18 minutes later, with her shoes in one hand and a coffee in the other, and she'd sat on the bathroom floor while Remy did her hair, and neither of them had said the obvious thing, which was, "Don't do this," because Remy wasn't doing it for Dylan. She was doing it for the numbers on the other side of the spreadsheet. She was doing it so that her mother could watch her walk down the aisle, so that 212 people who'd made travel arrangements didn't sit in a beautiful room waiting for a bride who'd decided, at 28, that she had too much dignity to show up. And she was doing it because she had something to say. The music started. Remy walked. She'd always been told she had a good poker face. One of the senior partners at Clearwater had said it made her unsettling in client meetings. She used it now, smiled at the faces turning to watch her, kept her pace steady, didn't look at Dylan until she reached the front, and when she did, She studied his expression the same way she studied a balance sheet, looking for the number that was wrong, the column that didn't add up. He looked relieved. That was the thing that finished it for her, the thing that sealed whatever small remaining uncertainty she'd carried through the night. He looked relieved, like she'd passed a test he'd been afraid she'd fail, like he genuinely doubted she would show up and was glad she had. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look ashamed. He looked like a man who thought he'd gotten away with something. The officiant began. Remy listened, smiled, nodded in the appropriate places. Her hands were steady. Her mother was crying happy tears in the third row, dabbing at her face with the handkerchief she'd carried to every significant occasion of her life. And Remy loved her so much it was almost physically painful to stand there and know what was about to happen. "Do you, Dylan Mercer? Take Remy Aldous. I'd like to say something," Remy said. Her voice was very clear in the high-ceilinged room. Completely calm, the officiant stopped. Dylan frowned. "Remy, thank you," she said, and she turned to face the room, 212 faces looking back at her. "I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I know a lot of you have traveled a long way, and I know how much this day means to the people in this room who love us." She paused. "I found out last night that Dylan has been staying at the Fairmont Hotel for the past 3 months on what he calls work trips, which surprised me, since the Fairmont is 12 blocks from his apartment, and the woman in room 1114 is someone he's apparently been seeing since before I agreed to marry him." The silence was extraordinary, the kind of silence that has weight and temperature. "I'm not going to marry him," she said. "I thought you should hear that from me, and not from a whisper campaign over the next 6 months. I'm sorry to have asked you here for this." She looked at her mother, who had stopped crying and was staring at her with an expression Remy couldn't fully read. "I'm especially sorry to some of you." She took off the ring. She set it on the lectern next to the officiant's notes. She turned to walk back up the aisle. That was when the doors opened. She felt it before she saw it, a shift in the room's attention, a reorientation of 212 people, all turning toward the same point, away from her. She turned too. There were 4 men standing in the entrance of the Orpheum, not guests. She knew every name on that list. She'd written the seating chart herself. These 4 were not on it. The one in front was tall, somewhere in his early 40s, with the kind of face that had been arranged by experience rather than genetics. A pale scar ran from his left jaw to below his collar. He wore a dark charcoal suit that had not come off any rack, and he stood in the doorway of the Orpheum like he had already decided it belonged to him. His eyes found her immediately. Not Dylan, not the crowd. Her. He walked down the aisle. The crowd parted without being asked. Remy stood where she was because her legs had made a decision she hadn't consciously authorized, which was to stay perfectly still and wait. He stopped in front of her. "Mrs. Aldous." His voice was quiet, not low for effect, just genuinely quiet, the kind of quiet that means a person has never needed to raise it. "I apologize for the interruption." She stared at him. "I don't know you, no." A pause that was measured rather than accidental. "My name is Voss." He didn't offer a first name. "I have a proposal for you." Not this one, the faintest gesture toward Dylan, still standing at the front of the room with an expression Remy had never seen on his face before, which she identified, with some satisfaction, as fear. "This isn't a great time," she said. "I'm aware." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile. "I would suggest," he said, "that you come with me and let me explain. The alternative is standing in this room for another 20 minutes while 200 people try to decide what to do with their hands." Remy looked at the room. She looked at Dylan. She looked at her mother, who gave her a very small shrug that meant approximately, "I have no idea, but I raised you to handle things." She picked up the hem of her dress. "Fine," she said. "Explain." The car was black, long, and moved through downtown Vancouver with a confidence that suggested the traffic lights had been briefed in advance. Remy sat in the back seat with 4 inches of space between herself and Voss, and her wedding dress taking up approximately 2/3 of the available room. One of the other men sat in the front. The partition was up. "Talk," she said. Voss was looking out the window. "You work at Clearwater Capital. Reconciliation and Forensic Audit, Junior Division. You've been there 4 years. I know where I work. You flagged an irregularity in the Harwick accounts 14 months ago. It was reassigned to a senior analyst named Brennan. He paused. Nothing was done with it. She went very still. How do you know about that? Because the irregularity you flagged involves a flow of approximately $9 million through 3 shell companies that terminate in an account I've been trying to locate for 18 months. He turned to look at her then, and his eyes were a very dark grey, and they were completely steady. You found the end of the thread, you just weren't given the tools to pull it. Remy thought about Brennan, about the way Book had taken the file from her with a smile and said she'd done good work, and she'd never heard another word about it. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you to pull the thread," he said. "I want access to the documentation you compiled before the file was reassigned. And I want your eyes on a second set of accounts for the next 6 months. That's not legal." "No," he agreed. "And what do I get?" He looked at her for a moment. "What do you need?" The question was so direct it almost caught her off guard. She was used to people offering things. She wasn't used to people asking. "Money," she said. "My mother has medical debt from the past 2 years. About 60,000. And I need a new place to live because I gave up my apartment when Dylan and I got engaged, and I have nowhere to go tonight." Voss said nothing for a moment. "Done," he said. "Just like that. I don't negotiate on things that aren't worth negotiating on." He turned back to the window. "You'll have an apartment by this evening. The debt will be cleared by the end of the week. You'll be on a retainer, paid in cash, transferred through a routing system that doesn't exist. You're very sure I'll agree?" "No," he said. "I'm not. I think you're exactly the kind of person who might say no on principle." A pause. "But I think you're also the kind of person who did the math on the way here and knows that what I'm offering is worth more than the principle." She hated that he was right. She hated it specifically, the way you hate something that is true and uncomfortable and not going away just because you dislike it. 6 months, she said. "I want a written agreement." He almost smiled. "People in my position don't generally put things in writing. People in my position don't work off a handshake." She held his gaze. "Written agreement, specific deliverables on both sides, exit clause if either party breaches. I'll draft it myself." He studied her for a long moment. "Fine," he said. "Draft it." The apartment was on the 23rd floor of a building on Cole Harbour that had a concierge and a keyless entry system and a view of the water that Remy stood in front of for almost 10 minutes before she accepted it was real. The dress was still on. She hadn't had anywhere else to change. She called her mother from the bathroom floor, which was where she'd ended up, sitting with her back against the cool tile and the skirt of the dress arranged around her like a collapsed parachute. "Are you safe?" her mother asked. "Yes. Are you okay?" Remy thought about this honestly. "I will be," she said. Eventually. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "The man who came in, the one you left with, his name is Voss." Another pause. "He looked like trouble, Remy. He is trouble." She picked at a loose thread on the hem of the dress. "But it's a specific kind. The kind with a contract." She drafted the agreement that night, still in the dress, sitting at the kitchen island on a stool she'd dragged from under the counter, because there was no furniture yet except a bed that had appeared while she was on the phone with her mother, which she was choosing not to think too hard about. She drafted it in the same format she used at Clearwater. Deliverables, timeline, consideration on both sides, penalties for breach, exit conditions. She was thorough. She was specific. She was not going to be a loose end in someone else's accounting. She sent it to the number Voss had given her at 2:14 a.m. He sent it back signed at 2:19 a.m. She stared at his signature for a moment, the name written out fully for the first time. Callum Voss. No middle initial. Slightly compressed. The handwriting of someone who had learned to move quickly through paperwork a long time ago. She filed it in a folder on her phone labeled Utilities. She went to sleep. She met him again 3 days later in the back office of a restaurant in Chinatown that was closed on Tuesdays and therefore empty except for 2 men at the door who looked at Remy's laptop bag with the expression of people considering whether it was a threat and deciding reluctantly that it probably wasn't. Voss was at a table with documents spread in front of him. He didn't look up when she came in. She sat across from him and opened her laptop. "The Harwick accounts," she said without preamble, "run through a numbered company registered in Manitoba that has one director listed, who is also the sole director of 4 other numbered companies, all registered within the same 6-month window. The end point isn't offshore, it's domestic. Someone thought that made it cleaner. It makes it messier, actually, because domestic transfer records are easier to subpoena." She turned the screen toward him. "This is where the money is sitting right now." He looked at the screen. His expression didn't change, but something in it shifted, a fractional tightening around the eyes that she was starting to learn to read. It meant she'd said something useful. "How long did it take you to find this?" he said. "2 evenings. He looked at her properly then. Brennan had that file for 14 months. "Brennan was looking for a reason to close it," she said. "I was looking for where it went." He sat back slightly. He had a coffee in front of him, untouched, and he turned it once on the table without drinking it. A habit, she thought, something he did when he was thinking. "The account in Manitoba," he said. "Can you get into the transaction history?" "Not legally. I didn't ask about legally." She looked at him. "What I can do legally," she said carefully, "is cross-reference public filing records, director disclosures, and CRIE registered addresses to build a map of every entity connected to that numbered company, which gives you everything you need to know about who's moving the money without touching anything that would get the evidence thrown out if this ever went to court." Voss looked at her for a long moment. "You're worried about it going to court," he said. "I'm worried about doing this correctly," she said. "There's a difference between finding something and being able to use it. I don't know what you plan to do with this information, but if you want it to actually land, it needs to hold up. What I plan to do with it doesn't involve courts." She'd suspected that. She filed it away without comment. "Then you need it anyway," she said. "Clean documentation. Traceable. Because the people on the other side of that account are going to dispute whatever you bring to them, and you want something they can't argue with." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a streetcar went past on Pender, grinding over the rails. "You've thought about this more than I expected," he said. "I think about everything more than people expect," she said. "It's not a compliment, usually." Something changed in his expression. Not a smile. More like the space where a smile might eventually exist if given enough time. "I'll have a second set of files sent to you by Thursday," he said. "I'll need access to a printer that isn't connected to any network I can be traced through. There's one at the Coal Harbor office. 3rd floor. Ask for Nimi's. She'll set you up." Remy made a note. "One more thing." She looked up. "The woman in room 1114. She works in commercial real estate. Her name is I know who she is. Does she know what Dylan was doing?" Voss looked at her steadily. "No." Remy absorbed this. "Okay," she said. It didn't change the math, but it changed something else. Something she didn't have a clean word for, some small pocket of fairness she'd been carrying around without realizing it. She closed her laptop. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he confirmed. She left. The 6 months did not go the way she'd expected, which was to say they were harder and stranger and more clarifying than anything she'd experienced in the 3 years she'd spent adjusting herself to fit inside Dylan Mercer's version of what she should be. She worked. She found things. She built the map of the Harwick money the way she built every piece of analysis she'd ever done, methodically, without sentiment, letting the numbers tell the story they wanted to tell, rather than the one someone wanted to hear. She worked from the Coal Harbor office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and from the apartment on other days, and 3 times she met Voss in the Chinatown restaurant when something couldn't be explained over a secure line. He was not easy to work with, in the way that very precise people are difficult. He noticed everything, asked about gaps, pushed back when the analysis wasn't airtight. Twice he caught her moving too fast through a set of transactions and asked her to slow down, to explain her reasoning step by step, and she found, to her own irritation, that he was right to ask. The mistakes were small, but they were there. She fixed them. She didn't thank him for catching them, and he didn't expect her to. She learned things about him in the spaces between the work. Not from him directly, he volunteered almost nothing, but from the room around him, from the way people moved when he was present, from the documents she worked with and what they implied about the scale of what he ran. He was not just a man with a criminal organization. He was a man who had built something that functioned with the internal logic of a large institution, audit trails and accountability systems, and a chain of command that was actually adhered to. She found this interesting in a way she didn't entirely know what to do with. She learned that he'd taken over the organization at 31, after his predecessor was killed in a dispute that the official records described as a robbery. She learned that he had reorganized it significantly, shed certain operations, expanded others, moved money through structures that were sophisticated enough that 2 major financial crimes units had spent years not finding the actual endpoints, until she had. In 2 evenings, with publicly available data and a clear sense of what to look for. She thought about that sometimes, what it meant that she'd found it and no one else had. She was in the middle of the 4th month when she found the second irregularity, the one that wasn't in the Harwick accounts, the one that was in the second set of files Voss had given her, a flow of money that didn't match the declared purpose of the entity it passed through. Not Voss's money, money moving toward Voss from a source she didn't recognize, attached to a name that appeared nowhere else in the documentation. She sat with it for 2 days. Then she called the number. "There's something in the Rice account that doesn't fit your structure," she said when he answered. A pause. "I know." She waited. "It's not mine," he said. "I know it's not yours. It's moving toward you, through a vehicle you don't control." She paused. "Someone is using your infrastructure to move something, and they're doing it in a way that's designed to look like it came from you if anyone examines it." Silence on the line. "Where?" he said. She told him. She heard him exhale. Not sharply, just a slow, controlled release of breath that she was learning to read as the equivalent of a significant reaction in someone else. "Send me the documentation," he said. "Already sent." Another pause. "Remy." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, catalogued it, filed it, noted what it meant without making a decision about it yet. "Yes," she said. "This is important work," he said. "What you found. I need you to understand that." She held the phone and looked out at the harbor, at the mountains behind it, at the November clouds that were making their way in off the water. Almost a year since the night she'd checked Dylan's location and sat on the edge of a hotel bed and started calculating. "I understand," she said. "I'll deal with the Rice problem," he said. "After that, I have a question for you." "About the contract, about after the contract," he said. She said nothing for a moment. "Ask me when you've dealt with the Rice problem," she said. "Fair," he said. She hung up. He dealt with the Rice problem in 12 days, which was faster than she'd expected, and suggested he'd already known more of it than he'd let on. She filed that away too. He came to the Cole Harbor apartment on a Thursday evening, which was not their usual arrangement. He knocked, which he hadn't done the one other time he'd come to the building. She opened the door, and he was holding 2 coffees from the place on the corner, and he looked, for the first time since she'd met him in the doorway of the Orpheum, like someone who wasn't entirely certain of the next step. She found this deeply interesting. She let him in. They sat at the kitchen island and he put 1 coffee in front of her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Outside, the water was dark and the lights of the North Shore reflected off it in long, broken columns. "The contract ends in 2 weeks," he said. "I know," she said. "I drafted it. I'd like to continue the arrangement." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "In what capacity?" "In whatever capacity you're willing to consider." A pause. "There's more work. There will always be more work, the kind you're good at. But that's not what I'm asking." She looked at him, at the scar along his jaw. At the exhaustion she'd stopped reading as coldness 3 months ago, when she'd understood that they were different things. "What are you asking?" she said. He met her eyes. "I'm asking if you want to stay." She thought about the spreadsheet she'd made the night before her wedding. about the numbers on both sides, about the fact that she'd spent 3 years making herself smaller to fit inside someone else's life, and 6 months becoming more precisely herself than she'd been in years, and the uncomfortable truth that part of what had made that possible was the person sitting across from her right now. "You're terrible at asking for things," she said. "Yes," he said, "you should work on that. I'm aware." She set down her coffee. She looked out at the water for a moment, at the lights and the dark and the mountains she'd stared at every morning for 6 months. "I'm not changing the terms," she said. "Whatever this is, it's an agreement between 2 people who both know exactly what they're getting. I won't be a loose end, and I won't be a convenience, and I won't be managed." She looked back at him. "If that works for you, then yes, I'll stay." Voss looked at her for a long moment. "Draft the terms," he said. "I already have," she said. Something in his face moved then. Something that was not a smile but was close enough that she decided to count it. She slid the folder across the island. He opened it. He read it. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a pen. Not for show, just a pen, the kind a person carries because they sign things regularly. And he signed it on the last page without negotiating a single clause. She thought, not for the first time, that this was the most honest relationship she'd ever been in. She took the folder back. She filed it next to the first one, in the folder on her phone labeled Utilities, and decided she would probably need to rename it at some point. She didn't do it that night. That night, she sat at the window with her coffee and watched the lights on the water, and for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, the numbers in her head were quiet.